Perfect. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kristen Parent with the Middleton Chamber, and we are very excited to have you guys joining us today. So if you've been on some of our April sessions this month, you've learned that a lot of the programming that we're having is a result of the membership survey that we sent out earlier this year, and the results and the things that you guys were looking for. So this is a program that came out of that. We are very excited to have John Gardner here with us today to present on kind of the legal side of COVID and returning to the workplace and things that employers need to know. So a few reminders as we go ahead and get started. We would ask that you leave yourself on mute. So that little microphone button on the bottom, make sure that red slash is through it. We would love to see cameras on to see your beautiful faces if that's an option for you. You may also have noticed as I started talking that the closed captioning was turned on. So please feel free to use that service if it's a benefit to you. If you would prefer not to see it, you can click on the live transcript, closed caption, and hide those subtitles. So we will be monitoring chat today. So as questions come up and you don't want to forget them, please feel free to type them in. We're going to build in a few spots along the way to stop and answer those, but then we'll have a big Q&A session at the end to make sure that we address all of your questions today. So with that, I would love to introduce John Gardner. He's a partner at Dewitt, LLP, which is one of Wisconsin's largest law firms. He serves as the chair of the firm's Labor and Employment Practice Group. And John regularly advises employees on a wide variety of labor and employment law matters. He spent much of the last year counseling employers on employment issues related to the COVID pandemic. So John, thank you for being here, and I would love to turn this over to you.
Well, sounds good. Thank you very much, Kristen, and good morning, everybody. And thank you all for inviting me here to do this. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you and hopefully to give you some tidbits that you can use in connection to the businesses that you help run here. So as Kristen said, I am an employment law attorney working at Dewitt LLP. I am exclusively a management side attorney. So I only work with businesses. I guess on rare occasions, I'll work with the occasional individual, but I represent businesses. I counsel businesses. In the last year, as Kristen mentioned, I've been doing a heck of a lot of COVID related counseling, as I'm sure you can all imagine. And I'm sure that all of you have been involved in that to a significant degree as well. I've also done a significant amount of virtual presentations over the last year, which I'm guessing is no surprise to anybody. This should be, I guess, old hand by now. It's interesting. I do miss giving presentations in person. I like having kind of that verbal give and take. So, I mean, certainly, questions would be appreciated here. I know we said we do them through chat because that tends to be easier in this format. But hopefully at some point in the near future, we can start doing some of these in person again, although I do like the convenience of this. But in any event, on to the presentation. So we've got vaccines here and available. What do employers do with that information? What do employers do with respect to returning to work? These are things that I wanted to go ahead and cover in today's presentation. So here's a brief overview of what I wanted to take you all through today. So first, I wanted to start by going through an employer's ability to inquire about vaccination status. Can an employer ask? What questions should the employer ask if that's something that the employer is interested in doing? Can an employer require vaccination? If not requiring vaccination, can they incentivize vaccination? Wanted to address those issues as well. Obviously, here in Wisconsin, thankfully, a good chunk of the population has already gotten one shot and potentially two shots by now. But there's clearly still going to be a number of adults out there who have not yet been vaccinated, some who are hesitant to be vaccinated, and hopefully addressing those questions will be helpful for the businesses. Wanted to address an employer's ability to mandate a return to workplace. And then, depending on how that looks, what other concerns does an employer need to take into an account when dealing with that issue? And then finally, I wanted to address for those employers who have had people working in the office throughout a good chunk, if not all of this time, or who are planning on inviting a number of people back who might have been working at home, what are some health and safety precautions that the employers should potentially take from a legal perspective? So to start off with the first question, can an employer ask about the vaccination status of its employees? Now, I think the answer to this is pretty clear. The answer is yes. But these are unique circumstances. Just because we can ask about a vaccination status in the context of our current pandemic doesn't mean that once the pandemic is over, you can ask about vaccination status for other things. Now, I can't say in 18 years, 17 years now of doing this that I've had too many employers prior to the last year asking me whether or not they can inquire about vaccination status for certain things. I suppose it could come up, it generally doesn't. But for purposes of the pandemic, yes, you can ask about whether or not somebody is vaccinated for COVID-19, whether they are planning on getting vaccinated for COVID-19. Now, usually this type of a question, vaccination question, or a medical related question of an employee, usually employers are barred from asking those types of questions unless the questions are what the Americans with Disabilities Act considers to be job related and a business necessity. But here, the EEOC, our good friends in Washington, have come out with guidance that's actually relatively helpful for employers, saying that narrow questions that are just directed to vaccination status are not going to be something that triggers the ADA bar on medically related questioning. So bottom line, it is okay under federal law, at least according to what the EEOC says, and I haven't seen any other guidance suggesting that the EEOC is wrong on this. And I don't think there's anything in Wisconsin law, anything under privacy laws that would prohibit an employer from asking employees regarding their status. Now, I will say, if you do want to go ahead and ask employees about vaccination status, the questions should be narrow. So a couple of examples of questions that I think are okay. Are you planning on receiving the vaccine? It's a yes or no question. Have you received the vaccine? Have you received both doses of the vaccine if it's not the Johnson & Johnson vaccine? Those, I think, are appropriate questions. If you start getting a little bit more broad or open-ended with your questioning, I think you could run into some problems. And I think as a result, you want to try to avoid doing that. So possibly an example of what you don't want to ask, is there some medical reason why you can't get a vaccine? Why aren't you planning on getting a vaccine? Those types of questions could lead to the employee providing you with disability-related information or medical-related information. And as a result, that could trigger obligations under the Americans with Disabilities Act and potentially lead to some type of a claim if some inappropriate information is drawn out. Now, I don't think it's going to be terribly hard for employers to go ahead and ask these questions in a narrow focus. And so if you do ask, are employees vaccinated? Are you vaccinated? I think it is a good idea for employers to keep that information handy, keep a record of that information. And I'm going to get into it in a little bit more detail later on, but I think an employer having a good sense as to how many employees are vaccinated in their work facility is part and parcel with the employer's responsibility to maintain a safe workplace and could help reduce liability risks in the event that somebody ever does potentially catch COVID at the workplace. So definitely want to try to keep these things in mind and keep a record of who has said that they have actually gotten vaccinated. So in connection to whether or not you can ask whether somebody's vaccinated, can you request proof? And here, again, I think the answer is pretty clearly yes. Again, as I was just mentioning, you need to be careful not to get extraneous information relating to a person's other medical issues, concerns, disabilities, or et cetera. So then what is appropriate? Well, I think getting a copy of the vaccination card that those of us who have been vaccinated so far have been getting could work. That said, it certainly seems to me, and I've seen other articles written up on this, those vaccination cards seem like they're pretty easy to perhaps forge. Not suggesting that anybody would do that, but obviously we live in a world where we can't necessarily trust everybody. And I think there's even been some social media threads talking about how easy it would be to go ahead and forge this. I mean, you just write in the name of the particular vaccine you have and the date, and you get the form of the card, and it's hard to tell the difference, right? So I suppose to be extra clear and extra careful, what you could do as an employer is ask the employee to get a note from their doctor, just saying that they have been vaccinated. I suppose it's possible you could run into a healthcare provider that doesn't have time to go ahead and do this. Maybe you run into an employee who thinks that this is kind of a pain in the rear, especially when they're showing you the card. But if this is something that you as the employer are really concerned about, I think you could ask for that. Again, need to stay away from open-ended questions, and try to keep a narrow focus with what you're seeking. And in any event, regardless of what information is provided to you, there are confidentiality rules that you should keep track of. I mean, this is not information that you should broadcast to the rest of the workforce. This is not something that you should even broadcast necessarily to all of management. I would keep it relatively narrow in focus, but keep a record of it if you can. What if an employee refuses to give you proof? Because I'm guessing it's entirely possible that this could happen. You could always run, but staying away from the possibility that you might run away, you do have some options. Those options really depend on what you're asking for as the employer. Why are you asking for proof that people are vaccinated? Maybe it's because you've mandated the vaccine, and we'll get to in a little bit the ins and outs of mandating the vaccine. If you as an employer have made the decision to mandate it, maybe discipline would be appropriate if somebody refuses to tell you whether or not they're vaccinated. On the other hand, maybe you have set some type of a workforce goal to have a certain percentage of people vaccinated. Why would you do that? By having a certain percentage of people in the workplace vaccinated, you would limit the risk of exposure to COVID. You'd probably be well on your way to complying with OSHA regulations and guidance. And maybe you're aware of certain employees in the workforce who are potentially unable to get vaccinated. Maybe somebody's undergoing cancer treatments and their doctor has not permitted them to take the vaccine yet. Maybe there are employees with other allergy-related reasons why they can't be injected with the vaccine. And so to help protect those people, you want to see a certain percentage of your workforce vaccinated. If that is your goal, and somebody is refusing to tell you whether or not they're vaccinated, maybe you discipline them in some fashion as well. Maybe you limit their access to certain common areas of a facility where people tend to congregate. And certainly if you are incentivizing them in some way, refuse the incentive. We're going to talk in a little bit about potential incentives that could be out there for people. But some things that I've seen employers do so far are potentially put out a cash bonus, things of that nature. If that is in the offering and people refuse to tell you or provide proof that they've actually received a vaccine, they don't get the incentive. I guess I wanted to stop briefly here before I get into incentives and perhaps mandating vaccines in a little bit more detail and see if there's just any questions that people have had come to mind relating to asking about vaccination status. Kristen, have you seen anything yet?
Nothing in the chat yet.
Okay.
But please feel free to type something in there, or if you'd like to take yourself off mute quick, please do.
I do have a quick question.
Yeah,
I have a quick question.
Sure.
I own 2 restaurants, so public facing.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously being able to vaccinate our staff is incredibly important, keeping our staff safe as well as the public. I've seen a lot of restaurants earlier on, showing pictures of the clinics that they're holding, talking about how we're getting our staff vaccinated, those kinds of things, which give the public great confidence in coming back into restaurants. Quite honestly, it's a nice thing to be able to show. But I just wonder where it crosses the line on confidentiality for our employees.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're going to go ahead and do something like that as an employer, I would say, you want to get employee buy-in. So if you're going to actually have photos that you're going to post of people being vaccinated, of people, people who work at your restaurants, then definitely get their permission before you go ahead and do that. Now, I mean, obviously, I'm sure we all know a number of people. I know a number of people who on social media who are posting pictures of, hey, I got my shot, and they're showing the vaccination card or they're showing the injection site. Obviously, some people are happy to go ahead and spread this news. And if you confirm that with the employee in advance, I think that's fine. If you don't want to take the step of actually having a photo of the people posted on your website or otherwise posted at one of your restaurants or both of them, I think you could just say general policy, we offered a vaccine clinic to our employees, or we have been pushing vaccines or incentivizing our employees for vaccines. I think it's okay to go ahead and take those steps. I think there's a lot of wiggle room that you have here. But yeah, you're right. You should be respectful of people's personal privacy choices.
Mhm.
Does that
And
help?
is it okay then, even if it's not talking about clinics specifically, but can we say things like, we're all fully vaccinated now, or we're mostly fully vaccinated now, or,
Yeah,
like how far can we take that to, again, to give confidence to the public that it's okay to come
sure.
in?
Yeah, no, I think you could do that. I mean, if you have a restaurant, if one or both of your restaurants and everybody's gotten a shot who works there, I think it's perfectly fair to say we are fully vaccinated. If there are some people who are holding out, I suppose you could say that we are almost fully vaccinated, or put the percentage on there. I mean, I suppose you'd have to make the decision as to whether or not you think that's enough for the public to say, yes, I have confidence I'm going to show here if I know almost everybody's vaccinated. But that's more of a business decision. From a legal perspective, can you do that? Yeah, you can.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
John, I think I know the answer to this based on your comments, but I thought I'd just confirm. Can we ask the specific date when an employee received their vaccination?
Yeah, so that one I think is a little bit more gray area because of the way that Wisconsin has set this up. People who got vaccines early sometimes had a specific medical reason as to why they did. And so if you're asking for a particular date when you got the first vaccine, there is a chance that that could give you, as the employer, a little bit more information that, hey, maybe there's some underlying medical condition and that's the reason why they got their vaccine early. I mean, the chances of an employee or the EEOC pushing that issue hard, I think, is relatively small, but there is some risk there. And I think, the least risky approach is just, have you been vaccinated? Or have you gotten the first shot? Are you going to get the second shot? Things that are very, very narrow in focus that don't talk about dates. Does that help?
It does. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to move on to incentivizing. I alluded to this before, and yes, employers can certainly incentivize their employees to get vaccinated. There's no doubt in my mind. And in fact, I've heard of some interesting things out there in terms of certain incentives being offered. So I have a picture of Krispy Kreme here. I think Krispy Kreme did this not only for their employees, but they did this for customers, at least in some locations around the country, where they said, if you show us a vaccination card, you get a free donut. So it's an interesting juxtaposition of a donut versus something that's supposed to be rather healthy. But in any event, that's an incentive. I saw that there was a Michigan cannabis dispensary, and I'm guessing you can see where this is going. They were offering pot for shots. Obviously, in Michigan, there is some amount of legalized marijuana, which we do not have yet here in Wisconsin. But apparently, at a time in Michigan, anybody with a vaccination card could go ahead and, as they said on their website, get a doobie for showing a vaccine card. I'm guessing none of that is going to fly here for employers in the Middleton area. But there are a lot of things that you can do. You can offer paid time off. You can offer cash bonuses. You can offer a pizza party if you think that's going to be enough to go ahead and convince people who are hesitant to go ahead and do it. But let's talk a little bit more about paid time off. Now, I'm sure that, like a number of you who are listening here, some of you probably have gotten the second vaccine. I got my second vaccine, I think, like a week and a half ago, and I was fine for a little while, and then maybe 12 hours after I got the shot, I had like a 12 to 18-hour period where I didn't feel great, and then was okay again. I was working during that time, but for some people, it might be useful if they could get some paid time off, especially knowing that this type of thing can happen as a reaction to the first or the second shot. Now, if only there was some government program that could help employers give this time off. There is. Shocking. Under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, as it continues, employers can offer paid time off to employees to go ahead and get vaccinated and to deal with vaccinated shots. So the way that this law works, if you remember the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, it was only applicable to employers with less than 500 employees. And I'm guessing that's the majority, if not all of us in the audience here. those employers last year were required to comply with the rules and regulations under the FFCRA and provide leave for all of these different reasons relating to COVID or because kids are out of school, et cetera. So that requirement doesn't exist anymore. No employers are required to go ahead and provide that leave. But in the American Rescue Plan package that was passed by Congress back in March, employers of that same size now can voluntarily provide leave that would have qualified under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act to their employees and still get the same tax credits for it. So if you remember the tax credit system, how it worked is the amount of leave that was being provided under this law was not something that was supposed to cost employers money in the grand scheme of things. Yes, they'd have to front the money to provide the leave, but then they'd get that money back through tax credits through the federal government. And if they actually incurred more, they paid more in leave than they incurred in taxes, they would get a check. So that system now is still in place voluntarily. But one of the changes that was made by the American Rescue Plan is that now, in addition to all of the other reasons for leave that we became familiar with in 2020, now employers can provide leave for people to get vaccinated. You can provide time off, paid time off for leave to get vaccinated, and then a recovery period up to 10 days as of April 1st. And again, if we have a qualifying employee and you are a qualifying business, again, a business with less than 500 employees, that is something that you have the option of offering, and you will get reimbursed by the federal government if the system is followed appropriately. The way that this new leave option is set up, I read it as being not only voluntarily as to whether or not to comply with the whole thing or not. I think you can comply with certain aspects of it. So to me, there is no reason why you as an employer couldn't say, I don't want to go back into providing people with family leave for an extensive period of time. I don't want to provide people with an additional 10 days to quarantine in certain circumstances. But I do want to provide people with paid time off for vaccines. And, the Biden administration, I think even last week, was touting that, hey, the American Rescue Plan has this option out there. I think employers could decide, I'm going to pay employees to get the vaccine if it's during work time through paid time off. And should they suffer any adverse effects from that, I'm going to give them paid time off in addition to the normal paid time off that I offer as an employer. And then I, as the employer, can go ahead, turn around and get tax credits for these. And this option remains in place now from April 1 through the end of September. Now, I gave a presentation on this, the FFCRA tax credits to the state bar maybe 3-4 weeks ago. And one of the questions I got was, well, what happens with people who have already been vaccinated by the time that we start instituting this plan? And I guess my answer is that if people got vaccinated before April 1st, which is when this law went into effect, you cannot, as the employer, pay them for the leave or whatever else time off they might have needed in connection to the vaccine, and then seek tax credits for it. However, beginning April 1st, if you had an employee who had to miss a couple of days, even if that happened a couple of weeks ago, it might be worth a try to see if you can get tax credits for that time off if you were giving them paid time off. I think pursuant to the law, as I read it, I think you should be able to do that, and the IRS should grant you that time. So this is definitely something that I think employers should be aware of. Paid time off might work as an incentive for people who are hesitant to get the vaccine, and it might be a way to reward at least some of your employees who have already or were planning on getting the vaccine already. That issue can be a little confusing, and obviously there's a lot of other pieces of the law that are tied into it. Are there any questions on that before I move on to something that's not paid leave related? Okay, well, and obviously if questions come up at the end, we can go ahead and cover it then. So still on the subject of incentivizing, there are a couple of concerns that I think employers need to be aware of. I don't think this applies to the paid leave option that I was just discussing under federal law, because that law presumes that you can get paid leave only if you're getting vaccinated. And so it's not going to apply to people who, for whatever reason, can't get vaccinated. But what about other people and other incentives? Well, I mean, there are people out there who, as I previously alluded to, can't get the vaccine because maybe they're undergoing a certain kind of cancer treatment or other kind of medical treatments, or they have allergies, and so they simply cannot get it. And then there are some people out there who, for religious reasons, can't get vaccines. I believe that that Christian scientists, among others, openly discourage vaccination. I don't think they outright ban it. But the way that the EEOC has interpreted the law, which I think is the right way in this case, there certainly could be religious beliefs out there that prevent people from getting vaccines. So if you run into that issue and you have somebody who actually can't get a vaccine, but you're offering these incentives, let's say it's a $500 cash bonus if you get the vaccine, what do you do with people who can't get the vaccine? And I think, as an employer, I haven't come across too many situations where this is the case, but I have had a couple. And in those, the employer decided, I think just to be safe, to provide the same incentive to the person who couldn't get vaccinated for one of these reasons that they were giving to people who actually got vaccinated. I don't know if employers have to do that, but I think that is a least risky option and something that employers should definitely keep in mind if they're going to incentivize beyond providing the paid leave that's provided for pursuant to the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. So, mandate, can you do it? At this point, yeah. I don't know that I would recommend it. I don't know if you've seen in the news here recently, but the Wisconsin legislature, which is obviously rather Republican and butts heads with our Democratic governor here quite a bit, the legislature has passed, I think, 2 different laws in the last 6 weeks that would have barred employers from requiring vaccines. The governor vetoed both of those, and I suspect he's going to continue to do that if similar laws are passed. But, the Wisconsin legislature is not the only legislature around the country that is apparently uncomfortable with the possibility that people could mandate vaccines. That being said, at least as of now, the EEOC says, yeah, it's probably okay. I think under other federal administrative agencies and federal law in general, it's probably okay to mandate. And in Wisconsin currently, it's probably okay. Now, I will say, if you as an employer mandate a vaccine and you are faced with an employee who absolutely does not want to have the vaccine, and by not getting the vaccine, you have to terminate them, because I mean, in essence, that's what you're saying with a mandate, right? You get it or else. I can certainly see legal challenges arising out of that. And despite the position that the EEOC has taken, we all view the EEOC as kind of the arbiter of various discrimination laws, and they are to a degree, but ultimately it's up to the courts to decide whether or not the EEOC is right or wrong. I can see somebody who is forced to take a vaccine or lose their job bring some type of a claim, whether it be under the Americans with Disabilities Act or maybe the Wisconsin Fair Employment Act. And even though I think the odds would be in the employer's favor, there's no guarantee that the employer would win. I could also see some, very innovative plaintiff's attorney coming up with some type of tort claim or a privacy violation claim that we just simply haven't seen before or thought of, that at a minimum, the employer may have to deal with in court. I mean, at bottom line, the area, the legal stance of mandating vaccines is undeveloped at best. And so if an employer wants to go ahead and mandate the vaccine, again, I don't think there's a straight legal bar, but there is going to be risk with doing so. In addition to that, I think you'd have to consider employee morale issues if you're going to do it, because there may be some people who are just absolutely anti-vaccine. I have talked to several employers who have, each of them, 1 or 2 people who think that the vaccines are a plot for world domination, and there's no way that you're going to convince them otherwise. A lot of people probably wouldn't listen to those folks, but some might, and those folks can generally make a lot of noise. So these are all things that I think employers would need to take into account if they're going to mandate a vaccine. I guess I wouldn't recommend mandation. I think incentivizing employees is probably the safer way to go legally, but I think the option does exist. Any questions on that before I kind of move on to more of a return to work focus? Okay. So, can employers require employees to return to work? Yes, you certainly can. I was trying to find a GIF with a maniacal laugh, and Mr. Burns seemed like the most obvious candidate here. So wanted to throw that out there, a little Simpsons love. But yes, you can force people to return to the office. If you want to go ahead and do that, you can do that for the vast majority, if not all of your employees. But of course, there are some concerns that I want you to take into account. There may be some people who need a reasonable accommodation for some type of a disability that actually requires them to telework. Maybe these folks can't get the vaccine and their doctor has decided that it's too risky for them to go back to a workplace, even if most people in that workplace have the vaccine. So it's possible that the employer may need to continue to provide them with a telework option, especially if they have already been teleworking. Now, I'm sure like my situation, I'm guessing a lot of yours, a lot of us have been working from home and a lot of our employees have been working from home. It used to be before the pandemic that a lot of my clients would say, being at the office is an essential function of the job. It's something that's required. And then part of the justification would be, well, not only is it good for just kind of employee morale and, everybody getting involved in the work culture, people aren't as productive at home. And the essential functions of their job are somehow lost if they're working from home for too long. I think over the last year, there's been a lot of employees who have proven that false. There's been a lot of employees who have been working from home very efficiently, as efficiently as they might have been in the office, and perhaps more efficiently in some cases. So I think as a result of that, it's going to be harder for employers going forward to say that working from home is not a reasonable accommodation, at least for some jobs. Obviously, some jobs you have to be present. And I'm sure that there are some employers represented on the call today where they've been in the workplace for the vast majority of the last year, or at least have had a good number of staff members there, because there are certain things that you simply can't do remotely. You can't work at a restaurant remotely. You can't work in a factory where things are being made remotely. But for those who are working on a computer, it's going to be potentially a harder argument for employers to make. But that doesn't mean that as the employer, you can't have people come back to the workplace. You just need to be aware that there may be some people for medical reasons, and I mentioned some of them, why maybe they are entitled to continue to work from home for at least a period of time. Another concern that I would raise, though, is employee morale. I've heard of some employers out there who have tried to effectively bring everybody back cold turkey and have run into some pretty good resistance and been left with some pretty upset employees. And this is in the context of a whole bunch of employers, both within the state of Wisconsin that I know, and then some really large employers nationally have said that at least for a period of time, if not semi-permanently, hey, we're going to at least allow some type of a hybrid model going forward because we think that the work environment has now changed for office employees. We think that after the last year, we can't necessarily go back to requiring people to be in the office for 5 days a week every week. So maybe it's more of a 2 days at home, 3 days in the office every week, something along those lines. I think employers that try to force people back, and it's a job that can be performed from home, could face some competition. And ultimately, you might be dealing with employees who start going to certain places based upon what their work from home policies are. Obviously, that happened a bit before the pandemic, but I think now, as a result of the pandemic, that could happen even more. But outside of those issues, there are health and safety issues that you as the employer need to take into account, both for the employees who have been working in the workplace this entire time or for the bulk of the last year, but also for people who are returning to work. If you are going to return people to work, you have to do it safely. And so there's a number of different things that apply, but really the biggest one is OSHA. At the end of the day, all employers have to comply with OSHA's general duty clause. And so for that, I'm sure you've all seen this before. I'll just quickly go over it. Each employer has to furnish to each of its employees a safe place of employment, effectively, that's free from hazards that could cause serious harm or death to employees. And those hazards can include illnesses. And in addition to that, then you've got to comply as the employer with health and safety standards that are promulgated under the OSHA Act. This is something that we all have to do, but I think it's raised, even more critically in the age of COVID. So what are those things that as employers we should take into account? And really, I have these listed here as OSHA recommendations, but if OSHA comes calling, it's certainly helpful if you actually took these more as things that you have to require, more as requirements, things that you have to comply with than recommendations. But here's a brief list of the kind of the critical things. The first one that I have listed here is assignment of a workplace coordinator who will be the person at the workplace facility responsible for any COVID-related issues, effectively a point person. And in talking with clients, frequently it makes sense to have HR do that. If you have a health or safety person already on staff, it makes sense to have them do it. But I think the general idea here is to just have there be some type of a hierarchy. So if these issues are brought up, people know where to go with concerns. So I think it's a good idea to do that. A hazard assessment, for firms that are just bringing people back to the workplace now or have just started it recently, or even, facilities that have been operating for the most part throughout the pandemic, even if not that different than what they would be doing pre-pandemic. I think some type of a hazard assessment is a good idea. And, OSHA probably wants us to take hours and hours to go ahead and do this and try to determine where the potential hazards are. I don't know if you necessarily need to do that, but just kind of spend, if you haven't done it, spend a little bit of time, maybe part of a day, thinking of where in the facility are people potentially at risk? Where are the areas where people congregate? Hallways, bathrooms. Do we need to limit the number of people who are in a bathroom at a given time? Do we need to limit the number of people who are in a conference room at a given time? Are there people with the ability to close offices that we can be less concerned about? There's a lot of things there that I think employers could relatively quickly come up with a list of areas that they should be concerned with. And if you take that step and come up with that list and start to think about how you can address it, I think you're well on your way to addressing OSHA's concerns. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the last bullet point that I have in this slide, identify where and how workers might be exposed. What measures can you use to go ahead and limit that exposure? Maybe it's continuing social distancing requirements. Maybe it's putting social distancing stickers or something on the floor, which we've seen at so many businesses that I'm sure we've gone into here over the last year. These, I think, are all things that should be taken into account. OSHA also recommends providing education and training to employees regarding policies and practices. Again, I'm sure OSHA would like it if we all sat down with our employees and had like an hour or two Zoom or in-person meeting where we went over these things. I think I could count on half of one hand how many of my clients have actually done that. But to have some type of written policies that talk about what the procedures should be, I think is really a no-brainer. And it could include very simple things that honestly you could find either on the DHS website here in Wisconsin, the Dane County website, or CDC, where it just has a list of wash hands. How long do you wash hands? Maintain social distancing, that type of thing. I think it would be a good idea, if you haven't already, to go ahead and see if you can pull some of those materials and at least send them in an email link to your employees and say, look at this. Strictly requiring employees to stay home if they're showing any symptoms. And I think that obviously goes without saying. And then this last one, ensure that employees who complain about safety-related concerns are not subjected to illegal retaliation. OSHA is always concerned about retaliation. Obviously, every federal agency is. I think this is something that that people need to keep in mind too, because there are going to be employees out there, and I'm sure some of you have seen them already, who come up to you at some point and say, so-and-so in the office is wearing their mask below their nose. This is ridiculous. What do I do? And who knows exactly what the reasons were why the person was wearing the mask below their nose. But it's possible that the person complaining just has a habit of complaining about those types of things, and maybe they're just frankly irritating. That being said, you can't take retaliatory steps against them for that. I certainly know that can be difficult with employees of that nature, but it's something to keep in mind when talking about these safety regulations. So I alluded to a little bit of this before. What steps can be or should be considered to help address the safety obligations that employers have? Again, I think mask requirements, even though the Wisconsin statewide order was struck down, our local Dane County order is still in place. And the CDC is still recommending inside people wear masks. I think until those two bodies say that it's not necessary anymore, we need to continue having people wear masks inside, even if inoculated, unless they tell us otherwise. Because I mean, honestly, that's one of the easiest things we can show OSHA. If OSHA comes calling as a result of somebody getting COVID in the workplace, I think it would be incredibly helpful for there to be a mask requirement. If there isn't, I think you're taking a pretty good risk. So I would definitely go ahead and do that. But then in addition to that, social distancing guidelines, limiting indoor capacity, physical barriers where appropriate, hand washing, all of these things that we have kind of seen and been aware of now for the last year. I think these are things that we want to continue to do. Again, self-monitoring for symptoms, again, require all employees to stay home, but also have some type of a written safety prevention policy. I've helped some of my clients put this together in the last year. I think there was a rush to do this when I think Dane County included this as a requirement back in June or July of last year. But it's something that Dane County still says employers should have. It's something that I think OSHA would definitely look for if they ever decided to show up at your workplace, which hopefully they don't, but if they do, it's something that would be really helpful that you have. And again, I don't think this has to be a very ridiculously intense policy, but something that talks about the preventative steps that you as the employer have taken, the steps that you take when people might have been exposed to COVID, things of that nature. I think it could be a 2 to 3 page document. I think it would be something helpful to have on site just in case. Finally, I have a couple of minutes left here before I wanted to wrap up and open this up to questions, but what kind of liability could we be looking at here if somebody is exposed to COVID at the workplace? And I think the number one thing is really a workers' compensation claim, because if somebody gets sick in the workplace, it's like getting injured in the workplace. It's something that should be covered by workers' comp, which I think on the whole is a good thing, because it means that employees can't sue the employer separately for that. Instead, you might have insurance, premium changes, things of that nature, and obviously that can be difficult to deal with. But I think on the whole, that's probably a helpful thing. OSHA penalties and an OSHA enforcement action, I think that could be more significant. Now, I did see that under the Trump administration, I guess there were $4 million in proposed penalties that OSHA laid out against employers for COVID-related failings in 2020. Certainly, the Biden administration, in my mind, is going to have a much more active OSHA than the Trump administration had. And I've already seen some of this. When I was preparing for the presentation, I tried to see if there were any other enforcement actions out there by OSHA that OSHA has published relating to COVID. And it turns out that a couple of weeks ago, I guess there's a tax preparation business in Massachusetts that has been hit with over $100,000 in fines relating to COVID concerns. Now, what they were doing was definitely on the far end of the spectrum of what you don't want to do. Apparently, they had a business owner there who was prohibiting masks, including from their employees or their customers. They didn't ensure any social distancing, and they weren't taking any other safeguards. Effectively, the owner of the business was saying this doesn't exist, it's a hoax. I'm guessing the vast majority, if not all of us in the audience, are not taking that step. If you are, I would recommend not doing that and actually following the CDC guidelines. But the risks exist. And I think the risks exist for OSHA penalties and enforcement actions, even with things that are not that extreme. And so I think it does make sense. And I would definitely advocate trying to follow the majority of these OSHA guidelines that I have thrown out there. The last thing that I want to mention are third-party actions. I've seen some of these in the press here nationally over the last few months. Now, Wisconsin, if you recall, earlier this year, the legislature did pass some liability protection for businesses, which the governor signed. And so this immunity currently says that employers are immune from COVID-related liabilities unless they have engaged in reckless or wanton conduct or intentional misconduct. Now, those terms have not yet been interpreted by any court. At some point they will be, but it means that simple mistakes here and there should not lead to any liability, even if it means that an employee got sick at work and then took the sickness home to a loved one or some other relative and that loved one passed away. Obviously, that's the extreme scenario, but it has happened in certain circumstances. And that's where I would be concerned about a third-party action, not the employee, him or herself, but a loved one who gets sick and then suffers severe consequences. Could they go ahead and sue the employer? Pursuant to this liability protection, it shouldn't happen in Wisconsin very often, but you still don't want to be in the position as the employer of saying, you don't do, you want to do obvious things that you probably should be doing to help prevent the spread of the disease. So one example that I thought of is if somebody gets sick at work and you know that they are positive for COVID, and you don't contact trace as the employer. You don't look to see who was close contact with that person to let them know and then to have them quarantine. I think that's a pretty significant mistake. I think that type of mistake arguably would go beyond negligence and could potentially give somebody some type of an angle to get beyond this liability shield. I think you should definitely consider those things and do whatever you can to maintain the health and safety of your employees and the people who enter your workforce, which I have no doubts everybody on here is going to do. But I think it makes sense to at least mention it to you. So that's my presentation for you this morning. So I wanted to go ahead and open it up for any additional questions that may have come up.
John, a question that I had. So do you think it's more likely for a business to see an investigation by OSHA, or do you think like Dane County Public Health would come in first?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, certainly up until January of this year, I would say that it would have been Dane County Public Health. And, for those of us in the audience, it's probably still more likely Dane County. But I mean, OSHA, they conduct random checks here and there. And certainly that's going to be more of a focus under the Biden administration than it was under the previous 4 years. And somebody can always make a complaint to OSHA. So if you have an employee who makes a complaint to OSHA, then OSHA is going to come calling. And that can be a pretty significant deal. So I think be aware of both, but I would say Dane County is probably more likely to be the one calling now.
Okay. And then I also just want to note that, the templates or the guides or like the I don't know, policies is probably a good word to put into play. Dane County has some really great ones. So if you guys are interested in those, I'd be happy to include those with the after email summary today too, just because some of those policies are even written and you just drop your business name in, which is kind of nice. So
yes, yeah,
and then I think we did have one question when we were talking about timeline of vaccinations. And so, you're not truly vaccinated until 2 weeks after you get that last shot, if you're getting the 2 dose. So wouldn't employers need to know that date? Or do you think it would be better just to say, are you at least 2 weeks post vaccination or whatever?
I think it's fair to go ahead and ask that way. Are you 2 weeks post second vaccination if you're getting the Moderna or the Pfizer? Or I think it's fair to say, are you fully vaccinated? And hopefully most people who are getting vaccinated are aware that, yes, technically you should wait the 2 weeks after the second shot to get the full effect of it. Okay. But again, the dates make me a little leery. Are you going to get in trouble if you ask about the dates? Probably not. But I think to be a little bit safer, it's better to ask, are you fully vaccinated? When will you be fully vaccinated?
Okay. More that yes or no, it sounds like is a better question.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Any other questions?
We had another one come through chat. Do you have
Okay.
any recommendations on a business hosting events or business hosted events?
Well, I mean, I think it's fine to go ahead and do it at some point, whether we're there quite yet. I mean, we still have to follow the Dane County order that's in place, and the CDC guidelines I would definitely go ahead and follow. And so there are still limits on the number of people who can be inside. And I think the majority of those rules still say to require masks. If you comply with those occupancy rules, and I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but if you comply with that and the masks, then I think it's probably okay to go ahead and do it. But obviously you're taking a little bit more of a risk, especially if you don't know what the inoculation status is of everybody who's there in attendance. If you can wait and do it outside, that's probably a better and safer way to do it. And, you know, I think it's possible that should anybody get sick, it's going to be harder to say that you failed to take appropriate safety precautions if you did it in the open air. But, you know, it's a good question. And, you know, obviously more and more entities are going to start doing this. And obviously there are some entities, hospitality industry, others that rely on doing these types of things. So, you know, we're going to see more and more of these things going out there. But I think the key is to just try to comply as best you can with the obligations that are set forth by the CDC and our local agencies.
And what about those businesses that are having events and maybe they're outside, all that? Have you seen anything about asking for people attending those to be vaccinated or showing proof of vaccination coming into a business event?
You know, I haven't talked with a client doing that, but you can do that. I mean, at this point, yes, it's if you want to try to ensure that everybody attending an event like that is vaccinated, I think you can have some type of proof of vaccination, and then you've got to decide, you know, what it is that proof that you want to require. You know, could you require them to show the vaccination card? Probably you could. But you know, I think it would be 100% fair to ask. And yeah, maybe you've got a couple of people who cheat the system, but I think you can definitely ask and go forward with that, at least as the law currently stands. Again, there's talk, especially on the Republican side of the aisle, that they don't like having like a so-called vaccine passport. But at this point, a private business can go ahead and do that. You bet. Any other questions? All right, well, seeing none, thank you very much for allowing me to come speak with you. And hopefully I can have this opportunity again. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you, John. I think it was some really great information. And I know I took a bunch of notes as well. So thank you for sharing all your knowledge with us.
You bet.
Just a quick plug for some upcoming chamber events. So May is next week, you guys. I can't believe it, but next week, Thursday, we'll be hosting Get Moving Middleton. And then we also have a session in May also. It's called Straightforward Strategies for Making Informed Decisions About Software. So it's really technology based, and like, how do you decide what technology or software is best for your business? How do you evaluate it? How do you run through that process? So that will be another virtual event that we're hosting in May. But huge thank you to all of you guys for attending, especially to John for sharing today. And we appreciate you guys being here, and we'll see you next time.